My parents forced me to donate my kidney to my brother, then kept it a secret from everyone, so his fiancé could take credit for it. I walked into their wedding with the medical records. Look, I know I'm an idiot, okay? My therapist says I have a savior complex, but honestly, I think I'm just stupid. Growing up, my brother Marcus was the golden child who could literally set me on fire, and my parents would ask why I was so flammable. When I was 15, he locked me outside during a blizzard because I accidentally breathed too loud during his Call of Duty match. I had to sleep in our shed with the lawnmower. My mom found me the next morning and yelled at me for getting the cushions wet with snow. Marcus was creative with his torture, I'll give him that. He once convinced our entire school I was adopted from a family of circus clowns, which explained why I was so weird. His girlfriend Sarah jumped on that bandwagon and started honking at me in the halls. They were perfect for each other like Bonnie and Clyde, but somehow worse because at least those two had the decency to die. The only place I felt human was volunteering at the children's hospital. Turns out sick kids don't care if you're allegedly from clown stock. They just want someone to read them Harry Potter and sneak them extra jello. Marcus called it pathetic, but what did I care what a guy who peaked at beer pong thought? Then karma seemed to strike. Marcus's kidneys failed from years of treating his body like a frat house dumpster. Suddenly Mr. Invincible needed dialysis, and guess who was the only family match? The universe has a sick sense of humor because of course it was me, the family piñata. My parents didn't ask me to get tested. They just scheduled the appointment and told me when to show up. When the doctor confirmed I was a match, my mom actually cried tears of joy. Not for me, obviously, but because her precious boy would live to torment another day. The doctor pulled me aside since I was still a minor and asked if I was being pressured. I wanted to scream yes, but instead I heard myself saying I wanted to help. Here's where I become the world's biggest doormat. I agreed to donate, but made them promise Marcus would never know it was me. My parents agreed, but only if I became his full-time nurse during recovery, because apparently giving him an organ wasn't enough. I had to wipe his butt too. Those 6 months were hell. He threw bedpans at me, called me worthless while I changed his surgical dressings. Sarah visited daily, and they'd plan their future wedding while I literally cleaned up his pee. He'd say things like, "Thank God my donor wasn't defective like some people," while I injected his anti-rejection meds. I bit my tongue so hard I'm surprised I still have one. Every night I fantasized about telling him the truth, but I never did because I'm apparently allergic to standing up for myself. My breaking point came at my high school graduation. Marcus showed up wasted and announced to everyone that the only reason I graduated was because the school felt bad for the slow kid. My parents laughed. Actually laughed. That night I left a note that just said, "I'm done being your punching bag," and disappeared. 7 years of blessed silence later, my parents tracked me down at the pediatric ward where I worked. They claimed Grandma was dying and I needed to come immediately. Grandma had been dying for 20 years, so I should have known better, but apparently I'm still that stupid 15-year-old who gives kidneys to bullies. What I actually walked into Marcus's engagement party, and the bride was Sarah. The honking witch from high school was marrying my brother. But wait, it gets better. She was telling everyone she met Marcus when she donated her kidney to save his life. This lying piece of hot garbage had a fake scar and a whole story about how their love grew from her sacrifice. My parents sat there nodding along like they were watching Shakespeare instead of a con artist's performance. Sarah spotted me and her face lit up like Christmas. "Look who crawled back," she announced. The family disappointment who abandoned everyone. During dinner, Sarah went on about how she and Marcus were trying for kids, and she hoped they inherited her generous spirit, not the weak genes in his family. She stared directly at me while saying it. I wanted to flip the table, but instead I just smiled. I escaped to the bathroom and overheard Sarah with her bridesmaids. She was bragging about how she found out through hospital connections that Marcus had an anonymous donor. She researched the family and discovered I'd disappeared and created her fake story. Imagine being pathetic enough to donate anonymously. I couldn't believe it. I was going to snap right there and then. But that's when my parents cornered me in the kitchen. They begged me not to ruin Marcus's happiness with the truth. Sarah found me on the porch later smirking like the Grinch. "Must be hard watching him love me for something you could never do," she said. I looked at this woman who stole my sacrifice and turned it into a payday. I looked at my parents who sold my kidney story for their son's happiness. And I looked at my brother toasting his hero fiancé. And for the first time in my life, I smiled a real smile. Because I realized something. I had medical records. I had surgical reports. I had proof. And Sarah had a wedding in 3 weeks. It was about to go down. I went home that night and dug through my old boxes. Found everything from the hospital stay. The consent forms with my signature. The pre-surgery photos. The discharge papers. Even kept the hospital bracelet for some reason. I spread it all out on my bed and just stared at it. 7 years of keeping this secret, and now someone else was taking credit. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Couldn't focus on anything except Sarah's smug face. I started making copies of everything. Not sure what my plan was yet, but I knew I needed backups. My phone rang nonstop. Mom texting me about wedding preparations. Apparently, I was expected to help with centerpieces. I ignored everything and went to the library instead. Started researching what happens when someone lies about organ donation. Turns out it's not illegal to lie about being a donor, just morally disgusting. Sarah had covered her bases well. I drove past my old high school on the way home. Same building where she used to honk at me. Same parking lot where Marcus would leave me stranded after school. Nothing had changed except now they were getting married. My coworker Piper called to check on me. I almost told her everything but stopped myself. This was my mess to handle. That weekend, my parents showed up at my apartment uninvited. Dad had a key from when I first moved in. They brought wedding invitation samples and fabric swatches. Mom went on about how beautiful Sarah looked in her dress, how perfect she was for Marcus, how grateful they were she saved his life. I sat there holding a piece of ivory cardstock while they gushed. Dad mentioned they were thinking of having Sarah's donation story as part of the ceremony, maybe even having the surgeon who performed it give a speech. I asked which surgeon that would be. They got quiet and changed the subject. Sunday, I went back to the hospital where I worked, not for my shift, but to visit records. Told them I needed my own medical history for insurance. The clerk printed everything without questions. Walking out with that folder felt like carrying a bomb. Monday morning, Sarah called me directly, said she needed my help with wedding stuff since I was family. Her voice dripped fake sweetness. She wanted me to plan her bachelorette party. Me, the person whose life she made miserable, planning her celebration. I said I'd think about it. Really, I was buying time. Started writing down everything I remembered from the surgery. The recovery, the pain, details Sarah couldn't possibly know, like how the anesthesia made me cry uncontrollably afterward, or how I couldn't laugh for weeks because it hurt too much. Tuesday, I ran into an old classmate at the grocery store, Elizabeth from biology. She asked if I was going to Marcus and Sarah's wedding. Then she said, wasn't it romantic how Sarah saved him? I just nodded and bought my groceries. Wednesday, my parents invited me to dinner. When I arrived, Sarah and Marcus were there too. Surprise wedding planning session. Sarah had spreadsheets and timelines. She assigned me tasks like I was her employee. Marcus sat there scrolling his phone, occasionally grunting approval. Mom served his favorite meal while he complained about the temperature. Some things never change. Sarah cornered me in the hallway later, said she knew I was jealous, that I'd always wanted what she had, that Marcus chose her because she was everything I wasn't. Strong, beautiful, selfless. I bit my tongue so hard it bled. Thursday, I couldn't sleep, kept thinking about the wedding, about standing there watching her tell everyone about her fake sacrifice, about my parents crying with joy over a lie, about Marcus living his life never knowing who really saved him. Friday, Sarah texted me a list of bachelorette party venues, all expensive places I couldn't afford. When I mentioned the cost, she said not to worry, Marcus would cover it. With money he made at the job, he could only work because he had a functioning kidney. My kidney. Saturday, I went to the children's hospital for my volunteer shift. The kids always made me feel better. Read stories, played games, helped with crafts. One little girl named Mary asked why I looked sad. I told her sometimes grown-ups have complicated problems. She gave me a drawing of a rainbow. Said rainbows come after storms. Sweet kid. Sunday brought another family dinner. This time Sarah's parents were there too. Her mom went on about how proud she was of Sarah's generosity. Her dad said they raised her to help others. I watched my parents nod along enthusiastically. Marcus made a toast to his life-saving fiancé. I excused myself to throw up. Monday I called my therapist for an emergency session. Told her everything. She said I needed to decide what I wanted. Did I want recognition, justice, or just peace? I didn't know. All I knew was I couldn't watch this wedding happen. Not like this. Tuesday, Sarah sent me her official donation story. She wanted me to proofread it for the wedding program. Reading her lies made my hands shake. She'd researched medical details online but got small things wrong. Things only someone who actually went through it would know. Wednesday, I started avoiding everyone's calls. Needed space to think. Went for long walks trying to clear my head. Kept coming back to those medical records. To the truth sitting in my desk drawer. Thursday, my mom showed up at work. Said I was being selfish by not helping with the wedding. That Sarah had done so much for our family. That the least I could do was support her. I wanted to scream the truth right there in the hospital lobby. Friday, I agreed to meet Sarah for coffee. She wanted to go over bachelorette party details. Instead, she spent an hour talking about her future with Marcus, their kids, their house, their perfect life built on her perfect lie. When she mentioned wanting to start a charity for organ donors, I nearly choked on my latte. Saturday morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls from Sarah. My phone screen glowed accusingly in the dim light of my bedroom. Each notification a tiny hammer pounding against my already throbbing headache. She'd moved the bachelorette party to next weekend. Needed me to book a party bus that could hold 12 bridesmaids I'd never met, coordinate pickup times across 3 different cities, and somehow make it all happen with 7 days' notice. Her voicemails grew increasingly frantic with each message, starting with fake sweetness and escalating to barely contained panic. I texted back that I was busy. She responded with a novel about family obligations, how blood was thicker than water, and how Marcus would be so disappointed if I didn't support their love. The message was so long I had to scroll 3 times to reach the end. I turned off my phone and pulled my comforter over my head, trying to reclaim the peace of unconsciousness. Sunday, I finally met the bridesmaids at a planning brunch at some overpriced cafe downtown. They all had matching Team Bride shirts with Sarah's face screen printed on them in gold glitter. The photo they'd chosen was from her engagement shoot, where she was gazing adoringly at Marcus while holding her hand over her right side, where her supposedly missing kidney would be. One girl named Stephanie, who introduced herself as Sarah's college roommate, kept gushing about Sarah's kidney story, how brave she was to give up an organ for love, how romantic the whole thing was, like something out of a movie. She actually used the phrase modern fairy tale while clutching her mimosa. I stabbed my eggs Benedict with perhaps more force than necessary and smiled until my cheeks hurt. The hollandaise sauce looked unappetizing, yellow and thick like the lies coding everything about this wedding. Sarah held court at the head of the table, assigning everyone roles like we were planning D-Day instead of a bachelorette party. She had an actual spreadsheet printed out with color-coded responsibilities. I got stuck organizing games, specifically ones that would celebrate her journey as an organ donor, and picking up decorations that matched her kidney-themed party aesthetic. Yes, kidney-themed. She wanted anatomically correct organ garlands. Of course she did. Monday at work was rough. The hospital felt suffocating. Every corner reminding me of my own time here as a patient. Kept spacing out during rounds, staring at kidney function charts and thinking about that day 7 years ago. My supervisor, Dr. Chen, pulled me aside after I nearly gave the wrong medication dosage and asked if everything was okay. Her face was creased with genuine concern. I said wedding stress. She laughed, the sound echoing off the sterile walls, and said she understood completely. Told me about her own sister's wedding drama. If only she knew whose wedding and why. If only she knew the bride was claiming my literal organ as her own romantic gesture. That night, I sat with all my medical documents spread across my kitchen table like evidence in a crime scene. The fluorescent light above flickered occasionally, making the papers seem to pulse. Started highlighting the important parts with a yellow marker that bled through the thin hospital paper. My name, the dates, the procedures, evidence that couldn't be argued with, though I knew my family would try. Tuesday, Sarah called during my lunch break. I was sitting in my car in the hospital parking garage, trying to enjoy 15 minutes of peace with a sad desk salad. She'd had an idea, she said, her voice bright with false inspiration. Wanted to do a presentation at the reception about organ donation, maybe even register guests as donors on the spot. Turn her fake sacrifice into a real movement. She'd already contacted the local organ donation organization, name-dropping her personal experience to get their participation. My lettuce turned to ash in my mouth. I told her I had to go. Patient emergency. There wasn't one, but I couldn't listen anymore to her turning my sacrifice into her platform. I sat in my car for another 20 minutes, watching other healthcare workers come and go, wondering if any of them had family who would steal their medical trauma for attention. Wednesday brought another family dinner at my parents' house. The dining room smelled like my mother's pot roast, a smell that used to mean comfort, but now just meant another evening of pretending. This time, Sarah brought her wedding planner, a woman named Kathleen who wore a power suit and talked like she was organizing the Olympics instead of a wedding. She had a leather portfolio thick with fabric samples and vendor contracts. She went through every minute of the wedding day while my parents hung on each word like she was revealing the meaning of life. When she mentioned Sarah's hero moment during the father-daughter dance, apparently there would be a special spotlight and announcement about her donation, I accidentally snorted into my mashed potatoes. Everyone stared. My father's fork paused midway to his mouth. I blamed allergies, even though it was November and nothing was blooming. Thursday, I overheard two nurses at work discussing the wedding. They were restocking supplies in the room next to where I was updating charts. Apparently, Sarah had invited half the hospital, sending elaborate invitations that mentioned her life-saving gift in calligraphy. They were all excited to celebrate the woman who saved Marcus's life, gushing about how romantic it was. One of them wondered aloud if she'd wear a special pin or ribbon to mark her as a living donor. I hid in a supply closet and screamed into a pile of towels until my throat was raw. The terry cloth muffled the sound, but not the rage. Friday, Sarah ambushed me at my apartment. She had somehow gotten into the building and was waiting outside my door when I got home from work. She'd brought 3 bottles of wine and wedding favors to assemble. Little kidney-shaped cookies with "Sarah saved Marcus" written in icing. I'm not making this up. She'd found a specialty baker who created anatomically correct organ cookies. Each one was wrapped in cellophane with a ribbon that said, "Love gives life," in cursive. She sat on my couch, drinking my wine straight from the bottle, packaging lies in cellophane while complaining about wedding stress. How the florist didn't understand her vision for kidney-colored roses. How the DJ kept suggesting inappropriate songs for the organ donation presentation. I assembled favors in silence, each ribbon I tied feeling like a betrayal to myself. My fingers moved mechanically while my mind screamed. Saturday was the bachelorette party. The party bus I'd booked was a monstrosity of pink and white, with Sarah's last fling before the ring painted on the side in glitter. 12 hammered women in a limo celebrating a liar. Sarah wore a sash that said "Lifesaver," and a crown shaped like a kidney that lit up with LED lights. Again, not making this up. She'd had it custom made on Etsy. At every bar, she told strangers about her donation, collecting free drinks like sympathy cards. The story grew more elaborate with each telling. By the 3rd bar, she was claiming she'd been rushed into emergency surgery, that she'd flatlined on the table but love had brought her back. I spent most of the night in bathrooms, staring at my reflection in grimy mirrors and wondering how I'd ended up here. Stephanie found me hiding during the 3rd stop, a club with music so loud it vibrated in my chest. She was hammered on vodka cranberries and weepy mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers. She went on about how beautiful true love was, slurring her words, how Sarah and Marcus were meant to be, how the universe brought them together through her sacrifice. She actually said Sarah's kidney was like Cupid's arrow. I let her cry on my shoulder while planning my exit strategy, her tears soaking through my dress. The smell of her perfume mixed with alcohol made me nauseous. Sunday, I woke up to photos all over social media. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications. Sarah posing with her kidney crown like it was Miss America's tiara. Bridesmaids toasting her bravery with champagne flutes raised high. Marcus commenting with heart emojis and calling her his angel. I noticed something though. In every photo where I appeared, I looked dead inside, like someone had sucked out my soul and replaced it with obligation. My smile never reached my eyes. My coworker Piper texted asking if I was okay. She'd seen the photos too and said I looked like I needed a friend. Monday, Sarah sent a group text thanking everyone for the perfect night, complete with kidney and heart emojis. Then privately messaged me saying I'd seemed distant, that she hoped I wasn't jealous of her happiness, that she knew it must be hard watching Marcus love someone else, but I needed to move on for the family's sake. She suggested maybe I should consider therapy to deal with my lingering feelings. I threw my phone across the room. It hit the wall with a satisfying crack but survived unfortunately. The screen protector spiderwebbed, but the phone still worked, still delivered her poisonous messages. Tuesday, I went back to my therapist. Dr. Martinez had been seeing me since the kidney donation, though I'd stopped going regularly once I thought I was over it. Her office smelled like lavender and felt like the only safe space left in my world. I told her about the bachelorette party, the kidney cookies, the LED crown, everything. She listened with her usual calm expression, occasionally writing notes in her leather journal. She asked what was stopping me from telling the truth. I said I didn't know anymore. Maybe I was just too used to being the family doormat, trained from childhood to put Marcus first. Maybe I was scared of the confrontation, of watching my parents choose him again. Maybe part of me still hoped they'd suddenly realize on their own, have some magical epiphany. She said hope without action was just disappointment waiting to happen. The words hit like cold water. Wednesday, Sarah called with a crisis. Her voice was pitched high with panic. The venue had double booked the getting ready suite. Another bride would be using it in the morning, and Sarah would have to get ready in a regular hotel room like a common person. She needed me to fix it immediately. Spent 3 hours on the phone with the venue coordinator, then the hotel manager, then the other bride's planner, sorting out her problem while she texted me constant complaints and updates on her anxiety levels. Finally got it resolved by convincing the other bride to start an hour later in exchange for a partial refund that Sarah would cover. She didn't say thank you, just complained that the stress was bad for her remaining kidney. Thursday, my dad stopped by my work. He rarely visited me at the hospital, claiming it brought back difficult memories of Marcus's illness. He was wearing his good suit, the one he saved for important occasions. Said he was proud of how I was handling everything, how mature I was being about Sarah and Marcus, how he knew it wasn't easy, but family came first. He stood in the hallway while doctors and nurses rushed past, completely oblivious to the irony of discussing family loyalty in the place where I'd given up an organ for his favorite child. I wanted to ask when I'd ever come first, but just nodded instead. He patted my shoulder awkwardly and left, probably relieved to escape without a real conversation. Friday night, I couldn't stop staring at my medical records, the truth just sitting there in black and white, clinical and undeniable. Started thinking about what would happen if I told everyone. The wedding would be ruined. Sarah would be be exposed as a fraud in front of hundreds of guests. My parents would be furious, not at her for lying, but at me for revealing it. Marcus would probably find a way to blame me, say I was trying to sabotage his happiness out of jealousy. But Sarah would be exposed. Her whole fairy tale would crumble. The thought made me smile, then feel guilty for smiling, then smile again because why should I feel guilty for wanting the truth known? Saturday I met my mom for lunch at her favorite restaurant, the one with the garden patio. She wanted to go over my maid of honor speech. Apparently Sarah had made me maid of honor without asking, just announced it at the brunch like it was an honor I should be grateful for. Mom had written some notes about what I should say, her handwriting careful on monogrammed stationery, all about how wonderful Sarah was, how grateful our family was to have her, how blessed Marcus was to have found someone so selfless. She'd even included a line about how Sarah's sacrifice had saved our whole family. I read through it feeling sick, the words blurring together. The waitress asked if I was okay. I said yes, just wedding emotions. Sunday Sarah dragged me to the final dress fitting. The bridal boutique smelled like expensive perfume and desperation. She looked beautiful, I'll admit that. The dress was a work of art, all delicate lace and tiny pearls. The seamstress went on about how radiant she was, how love made women glow from within. Sarah caught my eye in the mirror and winked, like we were sharing a secret, like she hadn't stolen my actual secret and turned it into her identity. The seamstress mentioned she'd heard about Sarah's donation, that her own cousin needed a kidney. Sarah launched into her story again, adding details about recovery that I recognized from my own experience. Monday, with 5 days until the wedding, the texts came constantly. My phone was never silent. Sarah needed opinions on everything. The flowers, should the kidney-colored roses be more pink or more brown? The music, was it tacky to play My Heart Will Go On during the organ donation presentation? The table settings, kidney-shaped place cards or just regular ones? Each message felt like another twist of the knife. My coworkers started noticing my mood. I snapped at a resident for a minor mistake. Piper brought me coffee and said I looked like I needed a friend. Almost told her everything but stopped. What would be the point? The wedding was in 5 days. The truth would come out or it wouldn't. Tuesday night I had a dream about the wedding. Sarah was walking down the aisle but her dress was made of my medical records. Everyone was clapping and crying while she left a trail of papers behind her. Each step revealed another procedure note, another test result. Marcus stood at the altar holding a kidney in a jar. I woke up at 3 a.m. drenched in sweat and couldn't get back to sleep. Spent the rest of the night reading old medical forums about living kidney donation, finding comfort in strangers' stories. Wednesday Sarah's mom called. Mrs. Patterson had always been kind to me, which made her call worse. Wanted to thank me for everything I'd done. Said she knew Sarah could be demanding but she was just excited. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. She said Sarah had told her about my kidney problems as a kid, how I'd needed help and Sarah's research into organ donation had inspired her to help others. This woman had twisted even my childhood medical issues into her narrative. I'd had kidney infections, nothing that required donation. But in Sarah's version, she'd been inspired by my suffering to become an advocate. I hung up and threw up, my body rejecting the lies as violently as my mind did. Thursday was the rehearsal. The venue looked like a fairy tale in the evening light, all twinkling lights and flowing fabric. I stood at the altar while the wedding planner directed everyone like a drill sergeant. She had a headset and a clipboard, barking orders about timing and positioning. Sarah and Marcus practiced their vows. He promised to love her for saving his life. She promised to always put his needs first like she had when she gave him her kidney. My parents cried actual tears. I bit my cheek until it bled, the copper taste grounding me. The rehearsal dinner was at an expensive restaurant downtown, the kind with a dress code and a wine list thicker than a novel. Sarah's dad gave a toast about his daughter's selfless nature, how she'd been generous since childhood. My dad toasted Sarah for giving their family hope. Marcus toasted his guardian angel, and mentioned how she never talked about her sacrifice, how humble she was. I toasted bread because I needed something in my stomach besides rage and the excellent wine that was making everything feel surreal. Sarah cornered me during dessert. The chocolate souffle sat untouched between us as she leaned in conspiratorially. Said she knew tomorrow was hard for me but she appreciated my support. That maybe one day I'd find someone who loved me like Marcus loved her. Someone who'd see past my issues and accept me anyway. She patted my hand condescendingly. I gripped my fork so hard I'm surprised it didn't bend. The weight of 7 years of silence sat on my chest like a stone. Friday morning, the day before the wedding, I woke up with a decision made. The clarity was startling after months of confusion. I couldn't do it. Couldn't stand there and watch this happen. Couldn't be part of this lie anymore. I called Sarah and told her I was sick. Food poisoning from the rehearsal dinner. She screamed at me for 20 minutes about ruining her perfect day. About how selfish I was. About how I always made everything about me. The irony of her calling me selfish while wearing my kidney was not lost on me. I hung up and turned off my phone. Sat in my apartment staring at those medical records. At the truth nobody wanted to hear. The morning light made the papers look almost holy. My parents showed up an hour later with my spare key again. Mom was crying. Her makeup already ruined at 10 in the morning. Dad was red-faced, angrier than I'd seen him since Marcus's diagnosis. They said I was destroying the family, that I needed to get dressed and get to the venue immediately, that Sarah was having a breakdown, and it was my fault. I looked at these people who raised me, who were supposed to protect me, who chose Marcus every single time, from the smallest childhood disputes to the life-altering decision to take my kidney. And I said no. 1 word, 2 letters, the shortest sentence that took 22 years to say. They threatened everything. To cut me off financially, though I'd been independent for years. To never speak to me again. To tell everyone what a horrible person I was. To remove me from their will. To pretend I'd never existed. I let them rant, their words washing over me like white noise. When they finally ran out of steam, exhausted from their own dramatics, I asked them one question. Did they remember when I was in the hospital for the kidney donation? Mom said of course. They were so worried about Marcus. The surgery had taken hours. Dad said it was the hardest time of their lives, watching Marcus suffer, not knowing if the kidney would take. Neither of them mentioned being worried about me. Their 17-year-old daughter going under the knife, being cut open, losing an organ, facing a lifetime of careful monitoring. That told me everything I'd always known, but never wanted to admit. They left eventually, slammed the door hard enough to knock a picture off my wall. It was a photo from my high school graduation, the one Marcus ruined by having a dialysis complication that morning. morning. I'm smiling, but you can see the disappointment in my eyes. I looked at my younger self trying to smile through the pain and made another decision. If they wanted to paint me as the villain, I might as well play the part properly. I got dressed. Not in the bridesmaid dress Sarah had picked, a hideous pink thing that looked like cotton candy had exploded, but in my nicest professional outfit. Black blazer, crisp white shirt, the kind of clothes that said I meant business. Grabbed my folder of medical records and my car keys. If I was going to blow up my life, might as well do it properly, with documentation. The venue was beautiful. Sarah had spared no expense with Marcus's money. Flowers everywhere in shades of pink and white, a string quartet playing classical music, guests already arriving in their finest clothes. The parking lot was full of luxury cars. I parked and sat in my car for 10 minutes just breathing, watching people walk in, happy couples, families, friends, all there to celebrate a lie. The string quartet's music drifted through my cracked window. Finally, I grabbed my folder and went inside. The bridal suite was chaos. Bridesmaids running around in matching robes, hair and makeup people everywhere with their cases of supplies. Sarah in the center like a queen holding court. She saw me and her face went through about 10 emotions in rapid succession. Started with shock, moved through disbelief, and settled on rage. Started screaming about how dare I show up not dressed. How dare I stress her on her day. How dare I exist, basically. Her voice went shrill, the makeup artist stepping back with her brush still raised. The bridesmaids circled like protective wolves. Stephanie actually asked if they should call security. Another suggested I was having a mental breakdown. I didn't say anything, just stood there holding my folder while Sarah ranted. Her face grew redder under the carefully applied foundation. When she finally paused for breath, I set the folder on the table. The sound it made seemed to echo. Said she might want to look at it before the ceremony, then I left. Walked right out while everyone stared. My heels clicked on the marble floor, each step taking me further from the life I'd known. Found a quiet spot in the venue's garden and sat down to wait. The bench was stone, cold even through my clothes. The garden was beautiful, full of late fall flowers and carefully trimmed hedges. I could hear the quartet still playing inside, the music floating on the breeze. 20 minutes later, I heard the screaming. Sarah's voice carrying across the grounds, high and hysterical. Then Marcus's voice joining in, deeper but equally upset. Then my parents. The string quartet stopped playing abruptly, like someone had cut their strings. Guests started murmuring, wondering what was happening. I could see people peering out the windows, trying to understand the commotion. I sat on my bench watching clouds pass overhead. Felt weirdly calm for someone who'd just detonated a bomb. Piper found me first. She'd been invited as my +1 before everything exploded. Her purple dress looked beautiful in the garden light. She sat down beside me and asked what happened. So I told her everything, from the kidney donation at 17 to Sarah's lies to what was in that folder. Every detail I'd kept locked inside for 7 years. She listened without interrupting, her hand eventually finding mine. When I finished, she hugged me and said she was proud of me. First person to ever say that about this situation. We sat there together, watching the chaos unfold from a distance, as my family's perfect lie finally crumbled into truth. The security guard found us about 30 minutes later. Big guy named Gabriel who looked like he moonlifted as a bouncer. Said the family wanted me removed from the property immediately. Piper stood up and told him I was leaving anyway. We walked to the parking lot together while wedding guests pressed their faces against the windows like we were some kind of show. I could see them whispering behind their hands. Some were already on their phones, probably texting everyone who couldn't make it about the drama. My phone started blowing up before we even reached our cars. Texts from extended family, co-workers, random people from high school. Word travels fast when a wedding implodes. Sarah's cousin Janice sent a long message calling me selfish. My Aunt Elizabeth wanted to know if it was true about the kidney. Marcus's best man Peter just sent question marks, like 50 of them in a row. I turned the phone off and threw it in my glove compartment. Piper followed me back to my apartment. We ordered Chinese food and sat on my couch while I told her more details. About sleeping in the shed during the blizzard. About Marcus throwing bedpans at me during recovery. About my parents making me his nurse after I gave him my kidney. She kept shaking her head and saying variations of, "What is wrong with these people?" The lo mein tasted like cardboard, but I ate it anyway. Needed something in my stomach besides anxiety. Around 8, my landlord knocked. Said my parents had been calling the building office non-stop. They'd told him I was having a mental health crisis and needed intervention. He looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot in my doorway. I showed him my lease, reminded him I'd never missed rent, and said my family was no longer welcome on the property. He nodded and left quickly. Probably didn't want to get involved in whatever mess this was. Piper stayed the night. We watched terrible reality TV and didn't talk about what would happen next. She made coffee in the morning and helped me block numbers on my phone. My parents, Marcus, Sarah, all the bridesmaids, various relatives who'd already chosen sides. The block list grew longer than my contact list. My phone finally went quiet except for a few stragglers I'd missed. Sunday afternoon, someone knocked. I looked through the peephole expecting more family drama. Instead, found Dr. Chen from work standing there with a box of donuts. She'd heard about the wedding disaster through hospital gossip. Apparently, Sarah had invited several doctors and nurses who'd all witnessed the explosion. Dr. Chen said the whole thing sounded like a nightmare and asked if I needed anything. I almost cried at the simple kindness. Monday, I went back to work. Figured hiding wouldn't help anything. The hospital buzzed with gossip, but most people were professional enough to keep it to whispers. A few nurses gave me sympathetic looks. One guy from radiology actually high-fived me and said it was about time someone called out Sarah's BS. Apparently, she'd rubbed a lot of people wrong with her constant kidney donor story. Tuesday, my therapist called for an emergency session. Dr. Martinez had gotten wind of the wedding situation through some professional grapevine. We spent 2 hours unpacking everything. She said she was proud of me for finally standing up for myself, even if the timing was dramatic. Asked how I felt about losing my family. I said they'd been lost to me since I was 15 and sleeping in a shed. This just made it official. Wednesday brought a surprise visitor. Sarah's mom showed up at my apartment with red eyes and a Tupperware container. She looked older, like the past few days had aged her years. She apologized for believing Sarah's lies. Said she'd found Sarah's real medical records while helping clean out the wedding suite. Clean bill of health, never donated anything. She'd confronted Sarah who'd broken down and admitted everything. The research, the fake scar, the whole elaborate lie. Mrs. Patterson cried on my doorstep for 20 minutes. I didn't invite her in, but I took the cookies she brought. Thursday, I got a letter from my parents. Actual paper mail like it was 1995. 3 pages of them explaining how I'd ruined Marcus's life, how Sarah had left him at the altar, how he was devastated, how the whole family was humiliated, how I'd destroyed their reputation in the community. Not one line about the fact that I'd donated my kidney. Not one acknowledgement of Sarah's lies. Just pages of blame. I used it to line my cat's litter box. Seemed fitting. Friday, my coworker Elliot mentioned seeing Marcus at a bar downtown. Said he was hammered and telling everyone his sister sabotaged his wedding out of jealousy. That I'd always been unstable and attention-seeking. That I'd probably faked the medical records somehow. Elliot said people weren't buying it though. Too many guests had seen the actual documents. Too many people had heard Sarah's confession before she ran out. The truth was messier than Marcus's version, but it was still the truth. Saturday, I went to the farmer's market like nothing had happened. Bought vegetables and fresh bread. Ran into my high school teacher, Mrs. Henderson, who gave me a knowing look and squeezed my shoulder. She didn't say anything, but her eyes were kind. Small gestures like that kept me going. Reminders that not everyone in the world was like my family. Sunday, Piper convinced me to go hiking. Said fresh air would help clear my head. We drove an hour to a trail neither of us had tried before. Spent the day climbing hills and not talking about kidneys or weddings or family drama. At the summit, she took a selfie of us both looking sweaty and accomplished. First photo I'd smiled in naturally in months. Posted it on social media just to show I was still alive and functioning. Monday brought another surprise. A lawyer named Drew called saying they represented a potential client interested in my story. Not for money, but for a medical ethics case they were building about organ donation coercion. They'd heard about the wedding incident through medical channels. Wanted to know if I'd be willing to share my experience. I said I'd think about it. Felt weird turning my trauma into a case study, but maybe it could help someone else. Tuesday, Sarah texted from a new number. A long, rambling message about how I'd ruined her life. How Marcus wouldn't speak to her. How her parents were disappointed. How she'd had to return all the wedding gifts. How people were calling her a liar and a fraud. How it was all my fault for not keeping the secret. I screenshot it and sent it to the lawyer. Seemed like evidence of something, even if I wasn't sure what. Wednesday, I ran into Marcus at the grocery store. First time seeing him since the wedding disaster. He looked rough, unshaven, wrinkled clothes, buying enough beer to stock a frat party. We made eye contact over the frozen foods. He started to say something, then stopped. Turned his cart around and left without his beer. I bought ice cream and felt oddly victorious. Thursday, the hospital held a staff meeting about professionalism and patient privacy. Everyone knew it was about the wedding gossip, but nobody said it directly. Afterward, Dr. Chen pulled me aside. Said there was a position opening in the children's ward in another city. Better pay, more responsibility, fresh start. Asked if I was interested. I said yes before she finished talking. Friday, I started packing. Not much to take really. 5 years in this apartment and it still felt temporary. Like I'd been waiting for something without knowing what. Piper helped me sort through things. Found photos from high school I'd forgotten about. Most went in the trash. Kept one of me at graduation. The one where I'm genuinely smiling before Marcus showed up hammered. Saturday, my parents showed up one last time. Brought Marcus with them like some kind of intervention. He looked worse than at the grocery store. They wanted me to apologize. To take back the truth somehow. To fix what I'd broken. Marcus actually said I owed him for ruining his life. The audacity made me laugh. Actually laugh. Which made them angrier. Mom said I was heartless. Dad said I was no daughter of his. Marcus said I'd always been jealous of him. I closed the door in their faces and went back to packing. Sunday was my last day at the local hospital. A few coworkers threw together a small goodbye party. Cake in the break room, some balloons, genuinely nice messages about how they'd miss me. Nobody mentioned the wedding, but everyone knew why I was leaving. Sometimes running away is the healthiest option. Dr. Chen hugged me and said the children's ward in the new city was lucky to have me. Monday, I drove 6 hours to my new city. Playlist full of upbeat songs, coffee in the cup holder, boxes in the back seat. The further I got from home, the lighter I felt. Like each mile was shedding weight I'd carried for years. Found my new apartment easily. Second floor, lots of windows, no family members with spare keys. The landlord seemed normal. The neighbors smiled. It felt like possibility. Tuesday, I started my new job. The children's ward was bright and cheerful. Murals on every wall, toys in the waiting room, staff who seemed genuinely happy to be there. My supervisor introduced me around. Nobody knew about kidneys or weddings or family drama. I was just the new nurse. Clean slate, fresh start. One little boy named Ethan asked if I was nice. I said I tried to be. He said that was good enough for him. Wednesday, Piper called to check in. Said the gossip back home was dying down. Sarah had apparently left town too. Marcus was living with our parents again. My old apartment had already been rented. Life was moving on without me there. She said she was proud of me for leaving, for choosing myself finally. We made plans for her to visit next month. Thursday, I unpacked the last box. Found my medical records at the bottom. The folder that had ended everything. Or maybe started everything, depending on how you looked at it. I put them in a filing cabinet in my new apartment. Evidence of who I was, what I'd given, what I'd survived. Proof that I wasn't crazy or jealous or attention-seeking. Just someone who'd finally told the truth. Friday, I worked my first overnight shift at the new hospital. Quiet except for the usual medical sounds. Monitors beeping, IV drips, occasional calls for assistance. One teenage girl couldn't sleep, worried about her surgery next week. I sat with her and talked about random things. Movies, music, how weird hospital jello was. Didn't mention my own surgery, didn't make it about me. Just listened and distracted her until she dozed off. Saturday, I explored my new city. Found a coffee shop that made perfect lattes. A bookstore with creaky floors and too many books. A park with walking trails and a pond. Everything felt like a discovery. Like I was finally living my own life instead of managing everyone else's drama.